Welcome back. If you're new to my channel, a very warm welcome to you. I make ASMR videos. I have a variety of ASMR videos on my channel. You can find mostly whispered content, horror stories, casual haul videos, or really casual laid back videos, and even role plays. And if you see in my shorts section, those are restricted to my creative journal shorts, so you can check that out if you'd like. And if you enjoy my content, I would really appreciate if you can consider subscribing. Give me a thumbs up, it will really help. So today I have something really, really exciting. I have 6 or 5, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, yes. I have 6 scary stories today, and what is really exciting about these stories are 2 of them were sent to me by a subscriber, Lynn. Thank you so much, Lynn. I was very excited to receive your email. You're the first person who has sent to me scary stories, and I was very excited, and I have not read the stories. I want to keep it real, so I haven't read the stories. I've just included it to the 4 other stories that I have. So yes, really excited about that. Thank you so much, Lynn. I really, really appreciate it. So let's get started with the stories. Okay. Story number 1. Night security job. I used to work as a night security guard at a small office building downtown. It wasn't a big place, just a 4-story building with a few different businesses inside, mostly law firms and accountants. The job was usually uneventful, and I spent most of my nights walking the same rounds, sipping coffee and listening to podcasts to pass the time. One night I was doing my usual rounds when I noticed something strange on the security cameras. The building had a system that covered all the hallways and the main entrances. Usually they just showed empty corridors and the occasional cleaning crew. But that night, as I glanced at the monitor, I saw a figure standing in the hallway on the 3rd floor. It was strange because I knew for a fact that the building was empty. All the offices had been closed for hours, and I hadn't seen anyone enter since then. The figure was just standing there, completely still, facing away from the camera. It was hard to make out any details in the grainy footage, but it looked like a woman, her hair long and dark, wearing a white dress. I watched the monitor for a few seconds, waiting for her to move, but she didn't. Just as I was about to radio in the sighting, the figure turned. Slowly, her head twisted around, and for a moment, it looked like she was staring right at the camera, right at me. Her face was pale, almost grey, and her eyes were dark, empty voids. I felt a chill run down my spine, and without thinking, I grabbed my flashlight and headed for the stairs. When I reached the third floor, the hallway was completely empty. I walked the entire length of it, checking every door, every corner, but there was no sign of the woman. The place was silent. I checked the camera feed again on my phone, but the figure was gone. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just a glitch in the camera or a trick of the light. But the feeling of unease lingered, and I couldn't shake the image of that face from my mind. I finished my rounds trying to keep busy, but every now and then I would glance at the cameras, half expecting to see her again. Around 3 a.m., I was back at the security desk, going over some paperwork when I heard it. The sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing through the empty hallway. I looked up at the monitors, but the hallways were empty. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they were right outside the door to the security office. I stood up, my heart racing, and shone my flashlight at the door. The footsteps stopped. There was a brief moment of silence. Then the door handle began to turn, slowly, as if someone on the other side was trying to open it. But the door was locked, and it didn't budge. I backed away, my hand shaking, as I reached for my radio. Just as I was about to call for backup, the handle stopped turning and the footsteps stuttered again. This time moving away from the door back down the hallway. I waited for a few minutes, listening, but the sound eventually faded into silence. When I finally worked up the nerve to open the door, the hallway was empty again, just as before. I never saw the figure on the cameras again after that night, but I couldn't get over the feeling that I wasn't alone in that building. I started dreading my shifts, the long empty hours filled with that same uneasy silence. I eventually transferred to a different post at a different location. I would too. I would have, on the same night itself, left it. probably never look back again. Okay. Story number 2. This story was sent to me by Lynn, a fellow subscriber. Thank you again. Thank you so much. Okay, the story is titled The Man at the Window. A few years ago, I moved into an apartment near my office building. From the moment I walked in, it felt wrong. The air felt heavy, like the house was holding its breath, waiting. I brushed it off as I have an over-imaginative mind and thought maybe a new environment often felt strange at first. Nothing much happened on my first night in the apartment. Everything seemed pretty normal. On my second night, however, I was reading in bed when the temperature suddenly dropped, and not just a little. It was so cold I started shivering violently. Before I could grab a blanket, I heard it. A faint tapping like fingernails on glass. It came from the window, and do note at this point, my apartment was on the 3rd floor. I froze, heart racing, and turned slowly. He was there, a man standing just outside my window. His face was pale, his eyes bulging wide open, but the worst part was his smile. His lips were stretched so tight across his teeth that it looked like his face would split. Oh my goodness. This reminds me of a movie that I watched on Netflix recently. I think it's titled Smile. I can't remember. I think it's Smile. It's about this therapist who has this patient comes to consult her, and within minutes, she kills herself, and then she smiles really, really eerily, creepily before she takes her own life, and it's sort of a curse or something. It was really good. That movie reminded me of this. Okay, let's continue. Okay, his face was pale, his eyes bulging wide open, but the worst part was his smile. His lips were stretched so tight across his teeth that it looked like his face would split. There was no ladder, no balcony, nothing he could be standing on. He tapped again, his nails scraping against the glass. I blinked and he was gone. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. But the next morning, I convinced myself I had imagined it. Just nerves. I was about to go to bed the following night when I saw it again. 3 distinct scratches on the glass, exactly where I saw him tapping. My heart dropped, but I tried to ignore it. Run. the morning, the tapping started again, louder, closer. I slowly turned away in bed, expecting the worst, and saw him standing outside my window again. He was grinning, that awful skin-tearing grin staring down at me. His head twitched, his neck jerked at unnatural angles as he slowly leaned closer to the window. I could almost feel his breath cold against my skin. I ran out of the apartment and I didn't go back until the next morning. I left the apartment the very same day, and until today I don't know what he was or what he wanted. Yeah, it's better not to know. Just leave these things as it is. That story, the Morgue Shift. I used to work as an orderly in a hospital, and one of my duties was to occasionally cover shifts at the morgue. It was always quiet, always cold, and to be honest, I never liked being down there alone. The air felt heavy, the silence unsettling, but I told myself it was just a normal part of the job. One night I was on the midnight shift. Everything had been routine. A couple of bodies were locked in earlier from the ER, one of which was an older man who had died from natural causes. I had placed him in one of the storage drawers and settled in for what I expected to be an uneventful night. A few hours passed and I was sitting at the desk, half dozing off, when I heard a noise, a faint, soft thud. At first I thought it was nothing, but then it happened again, louder and more distinct. I got up and started checking the room. Everything seemed in order. The drawers were all shut. The equipment was still and nothing seemed out of place. I was about to chalk it up to my imagination when I heard it again. This time unmistakably coming from one of the drawers. My first instinct was to rationalize it. Bodies can sometimes shift as gases escape after death, right? But I've heard that before, and this was different. This wasn't just movement. It sounded like something or someone was hitting the inside of the drawer. I tried to keep calm, convincing myself it was just some strange occurrence. Maybe air trapped inside, or a mechanical fault with the drawer. But as I approached, the noise got louder and more insistent. It was coming from the old man's drawer. Oh God. I stood there for a moment, heart racing, trying to gather the courage to pull it open. It was late, I was alone, and all I could think of was getting out of that room. But protocol was protocol, and I had to check. With shaky hands, I unlocked the drawer and slid it open. There he was, lying exactly as I had placed him earlier, still cold and unmoving. I checked the body again, no signs of life, no pulse, nothing. I let out a nervous laugh, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But as I pushed the drawer back in, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. There were scratches, faint but visible on the inside of the drawer, right where his hands were. Fresh, like someone had been clawing at the metal. My mind raced for an explanation. I knew the scratches hadn't been there when I put him in, and then I saw it. His fingers, which I had folded over his chest earlier, were now splayed out as if he had tried to move. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding. I didn't know what to do. Should I call someone or leave the room? But as I stood there frozen, the lights above me flickered for a split second. When they came back on, I saw his hand twitch. Just the slightest movement, but enough to send me running. I locked the morgue door behind me and didn't go back in for the rest of my shift. When my colleague arrived the next morning, I told them that there had been an issue with the lights, but I didn't mention anything about the drawer or the scratches. I'm not sure what happened that night, and every time I think about it, I can't shake the feeling that maybe he wasn't truly gone when I put him in that drawer. Okay, fourth story. This was sent by Lynn. Thank you again. Very excited to read this. This is titled The Haunting at the Hotel. Okay. I was on a work trip a few years ago and stayed at a historic hotel that had been around a long time. It was beautiful but had a dark past. Murders, suicides, all the usual ghost story fodder. This is true, my goodness. I didn't believe in any of that though, so I didn't think twice about staying there. But that changed my second night. I woke up around midnight to the sound of footsteps outside my room. They were slow, like someone was pacing. I got up thinking maybe it was a guess. But when I looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. I checked the door and it was locked. But as I turned back to bed, the footsteps started again. This time, closer. I felt this overwhelming sense of dread, like something was standing just outside, waiting for me to open the door. I tried to ignore it, but then I heard a faint knock. I froze Suddenly the knock came again, but this time it came from inside the room, from the wardrobe. I stared at it, too terrified to move. The door creaked open, just a crack, and I could see the darkness inside shift, like something was moving in there. I slowly got up, trying not to make a sound, and approached the wardrobe. As I reached for the handle, the door burst open and something cold rushed past me, knocking me to the floor. The room went ice cold, and in the dim light I saw it, a figure hunched and twisted, standing in the corner. Its head tilted unnaturally to the side. Its eyes, there were no eyes, just empty, gaping sockets, staring right at me. It smiled, this horrid, broken smile, and then it whispered, "Come closer." This gives me goosebumps. I ran out of the room that night and I told the staff about it, but they just gave me this knowing look as if I wasn't the first to have seen something. I really want to know what happened then. Did you leave the hotel? Oh my god. I would have run out, never come back, leave all my belongings. Okay, my main story. The long way home. I was driving home late one night after visiting my brother. The roads were empty, the only sounds coming from my car and the occasional rustle of trees in the wind. I took a shortcut through a rural area, thinking it would save time. It was a road I knew well, but the late hour made everything seem different. As I drove, the headlights pierced the darkness, illuminating the narrow road ahead. I felt an unsettling sensation, as if I was being watched. Glancing in my rear view mirror, I noticed a set of headlights behind me, far enough away that I could barely make out the vehicle. I shrugged it off, focusing on the winding path ahead. A few minutes later, I turned onto an even smaller, less maintained road. I had always enjoyed the isolation of this area, but tonight felt different. The trees loomed closer, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. I decided to keep driving, eager to get home, when suddenly my car's engine sputtered and died. I rolled to a stop, cursing under my breath. The headlights blinkered out, plunging me into darkness. I tried to restart the engine, but it just clicked and sputtered. Panic set in as I realized I was stranded, alone on this deserted road. Grabbing my phone, I quickly checked for a signal, but there was nothing. I was miles away from civilization and I could hardly see a thing. Just as I was about to step out to check under the hood, I noticed the headlights behind me had stopped too. The vehicle, a dark short distance behind me, blocking the road. I felt a wave of dread wash over me. What were they doing? After a moment, the SUV's headlights turned off, plunging me back into darkness. My heart raced, and I instinctively locked the doors, peering through the window. I squinted into the darkness, trying to see if anyone was inside. The silhouette of the vehicle sat eerily still, and I began to feel a sense of claustrophobia. Minutes felt like hours as I sat in silence. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. It had only been 10 minutes since my car died. Just then I heard a soft knock on my window. My heart nearly stopped. I turned slowly to see a figure standing outside, partially illuminated by the dim light of my dashboard. It was a man dressed in a dark hoodie, his face obscured in shadow. I cracked my window just enough to hear him. "Do you need help?" he asked, his voice low and calm. I hesitated, weighing my options. Something felt off about him, but my instincts told me to be polite. "My car broke down," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm just waiting for a tow." "Okay, just stay put. I will see if I can get my flashlight," he said, stepping back into the shadows. My stomach twisted as I watched him move toward the SUV. The figure stood there for a moment, then suddenly turned and walked deeper into the woods. I could hear branches snapping under his feet, and panic surged through me. What was he doing? I was frozen in place, debating whether to stay in the car or run. Suddenly I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. My car door rattled as if someone was trying to open it. I whipped my head around, but no one was there. I grabbed my phone again, desperate to find a signal, but there was nothing. Then a terrifying thought struck me. What if the man was part of a group? I looked around, scanning the tree line, feeling eyes on me. I was completely isolated. Just as I was about to start my car again, the headlights of the SUV flickered back on, illuminating the area. The man reappeared, standing right next to his vehicle, but something was different. His posture was stiff and his movements seemed unnatural. He raised his hand slowly, and in that moment I saw his face, pale and expressionless, the light casting deep shadows around his eyes. I felt a jolt of fear. This wasn't a friendly offer of help. In a panic, I hit the gas, praying the engine would start. It roared to life, and I spun the wheel, tearing down the road. I glanced back once to see the figure figure standing still, watching me. The SUV's headlight off once again, swallowed by the darkness. Deep down, I felt like I had escaped, but I was still being followed. The unease lingered long after I turned onto a main road. That night, I arrived home shaken but relieved. I told my brother what had happened, but he brushed it off as my imagination. Still, the memory haunted me. Weeks later, I learned that a couple had gone missing from the very area I had driven through that night. Authorities believed they had encountered someone on the road, but no evidence had been found. To this day, I avoid that shortcut. Last story for today. The final call. I was a paramedic in a small town, and every shift brought its share of emergencies. But one call still haunts me to this day. It was a rainy night, and the streets were sleek with water. My partner and I were dispatched to a remote farmhouse on the outskirts of town. The call came from a frantic woman who claimed her husband was unconscious and not breathing. As we sped down the winding country roads, I could already sense something was off. When we arrived, the house loomed ahead, dark and shadowy against the stormy sky. The woman, Sarah, met us at the door, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with fear. She led us inside, where the air felt thick, almost suffocating. I watched her, and I followed her down a narrow hallway, the walls lined with family photos that seemed to watch us as we passed. In the living room, her husband lay sprawled on the floor. He looked pale and lifeless, a pool of vomit near his mouth. We immediately began our assessment. As my partner started chest compressions, I grabbed the defibrillator and prepared to administer shocks. What happened? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't know, she cried, her voice trembling. We were just watching TV and he suddenly collapsed. But something in her eyes didn't match her words. There was a flicker of something. Fear, yes, but also a glimmer of guilt. I shook it off because I had a job to do. We worked on him for what felt like an eternity, but despite our best efforts, he didn't respond. Finally, my partner called it. As I stood there, breathing heavily, I caught a glimpse of Sarah in the corner of the room. She was staring at her husband's body with an expression that sent chills down my spine, part sorrow and part relief. We need to call this in, I said, stepping back. But before I could reach for my radio, I heard a soft, low growl from the hallway. I turned, half expecting to see a stray dog or something, but instead, the air turned icy and I felt a chill creep up my spine. What was something in the shadows, something dark and indistinct, lurking just outside the living room. It vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "We need to get out of here," I said, starting to back toward the door. But before I could move, I started to feel a sense of dread. It felt like something was pressing down on me, heavy and suffocating. Suddenly, Sarah lunged toward me, her face twisted with rage. "You're not going anywhere," she screamed. But before I could react, I heard a voice, deep, echoing from the shadows. "Stay." In that moment I realized it wasn't just a husband lying on the floor. The darkness in that house was alive, feeding off the fear and despair. I grabbed my partner and we pushed past Sarah, sprinting toward the door. As we stumbled outside, the air felt lighter, but I could still hear that low growl behind me. We jumped into the ambulance and sped away. Later that evening, I tried to make sense of what had happened. I reported the incident, but no one believed me. And my partner. They said it was just the stress of the job. Yet the image of Sarah's face and that dark figure remained burned in my mind. Weeks later, I learned that the husband had been declared dead on arrival. The cause of death unknown, but the strangest part, a few days after our call, the farmhouse was found abandoned. Sarah had disappeared without a trace, leaving everything behind. Okay, that's the end of scary stories for today. I hope you liked it. I hope it creeped you out a little bit. Okay. Do let me know if you have suggestions for the next video, or I would love to read your horror stories, your personal encounters, etc. Do send them to me. I'll be very excited to read them. I hope you have